I know we all had strong feelings about this book, so there's a lot to talk about, and I want to encourage you, use the chat. If you have something you want to say and you can't figure out how to do it, just you could use the chat and say, please call on me, okay? And Debbie will see that and we'll be able to hear your comments. So before we begin talking about this book, I do want to tell you a little bit about what we've got coming up. In March, we have Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. If you remember A Man Called Ove, that's who wrote that book. And Beartown, he's a wonderful writer, so you'll enjoy Anxious People. April, we have Salt to the Sea by Ruth Sepetys. May, we have The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein. And in June, we have Lady Clementine, sometimes pronounced Lady Clementine, by Marie Benedict, about Churchill's wife. Okay, so we've got a nice selection of books coming up, and we hope you'll join us for all of those. To begin, a little background about
Lynda, one thing, sorry, before you start. I just want to tell everybody that the registration for Frederick Bachman's book is already online at dpjcc.org. So as soon as you're done today, they can go ahead and register for the next month. And of course, they can go to the Sterling World Library to pick up the book, or you can order it online through the Broward County Library System. So just wanted to encourage everybody for the next month. So before you started.
Great. Okay. A little bit about Janine Cummins. She is the author of 4 books, including this one. She wrote a best-selling memoir called A Rip in Heaven, and 3 novels, The Outside Boy, The Crooked Branch, and of course, American Dirt. She lives in New York City with her husband and 2 children. In one interview that I read online, she says she always wanted to be a writer, but was afraid that it was not possible to make a living that way. So she thought she would end up doing something practical, maybe submitting some poems to a local newspaper, that kind of thing. But then her cousin Julie was murdered when she was 16 years old. And she says her cousin was supposed to be the writer in the family. And so it made Cummins decide to live out that dream that they both shared. And in speaking of her cousin Julie, she likes to think that in some way that girl's flame is part of her now. And it was a horrific loss to her. She described it in her memoir, A Rip in Heaven. In addition, she tells us that her father died suddenly during the writing of American Dirt. And so while she was writing this book, she was coming from her own place of pain and grief, and she was able to bring those raw emotions to the story we just read. The author Stephen King called this book extraordinary. The Chicana writer Sandra Cisneros wrote in a blurb for the book that it was the great novel of Las Americas. And then to top it off, you know that Oprah chose it for her book club. And you know what that means. It's a great honor for the writer. And of course, it's lots and lots of book sales. But along with all of that praise, as all of us know, there was a lot of controversy that erupted in terms of negative reviews and responses from the Latinx writers who questioned if it was right for Janine Cummins to be the person who ended up writing this story. And we're going to talk about the controversy regarding the author a little bit on, but for now, I want to give you a brief summary and then get on with our thoughts about the book, and then we'll talk about the controversy that ensued. So as you recall, the story begins powerfully with bullets flying and a family being massacred. As the story unfolds, we meet Lydia Perez, who lives in Acapulco. She runs a bookstore. She has a darling 8-year-old son by the name of Luca, the love of her life. She's got a wonderful husband by the name of Sebastian. He's a journalist. And while there are cracks beginning to show in Acapulco because of the drug cartels, her life is fairly comfortable. In her bookstore, she's got some of her personal favorite books, in spite of the fact that they never sell. And then one day, this man comes in and he purchases 2 of her favorites, and she is shocked. Someone actually has her same taste in books. His name is Javier. He is erudite. He is charming. And unknown to Lydia, he is also the jefe, the chief, the leader of the newest drug cartel that has gruesomely taken over the city. Before she knows his real identity, Lydia develops this close friendship with him. To her, he's just a guy who has her same taste in books. He comes often to the bookstore to chat with her. They visit. They become good friends. And she loves the wonderful conversations that they share about books, about family, about life. The problem is that Lydia's husband is the journalist, and he is writing an expose, a tell-all profile of Javier. And of course, that leads to the bullets flying, killing all of Lydia's entire family, 16 of them, who had gathered in the grandmother's backyard for a quinceañera celebration for Lydia's niece. By sheer chance, Lydia and her 8-year-old son, Luca, were in the bathroom, and they survive. From their hiding place in the corner of the bathroom shower stall, they overhear one of the killers say, "What about the kid?" Lydia realizes that Javier is after them, and she is forced to flee miles away from her middle-class life. She and her son are instantly transformed into migrants. So they have to get now somewhere that Javier, the head of the cartel, cannot find them. They've got all their family members dead. They've got no place to go in Mexico. They end up riding La Bestia, the train that makes its way north towards the United States. And they join a lot of other people along the way. And we're going to meet the people that they meet. We meet Rebecca and Soledad. We meet Beto, the young boy who's traveling alone. We meet 2 brothers and their sons traveling. We meet Marisol, a woman desperate to return to her daughters in the U.S. She herself was living in the U.S. and was picked up, deported. They all have their stories, all of them trying to reach the North. It is through their experiences, most of which are truly horrifying, that we're able to get a perspective of what life is for the migrants who are desperate to begin a new life in a new country. So that's a bare bones outline for you. I want to ask you to begin our conversation. I want you to think back to when you first finished this book. It might have been a while ago, but try to remember back. How did you feel after reading this book? What was your reaction? How'd you feel after reading the book? Go ahead and chat, raise your hand.
Lynda, I felt very tired. It was a long journey, and it was an excruciating read, but I thought it was an important book to finish.
Yep, I agree. That's for sure. I see other hands up.
Can you hear me?
We have Jody Gast. Jody, if you'd go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I recommended it to a few people, and I said it, even though it was a very hard read in a lot of ways, there was some beautiful relationships that were formed, and some of them were fleeting and some of them were long-standing. But it also, besides being oppressive and scary, it was also hopeful and really lovely.
Yeah.
Jane Kaplan, would you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I thought after I read the book was, my goodness, how would the average person, including myself, ever survive some of the things they had to do, like to get on this train, jump on from a higher place and land on the top of the train, things like that, that were just, to me, would be an impossibility.
So frightening.
There was a lot of admiration I had after reading it about the plight and also what immigrants have to go through, not only emotionally, but physically, to actually make this journey, if indeed this was realistic.
Right. So I think you've really hit on a lot of the themes, which I was going to ask you. You've talked about the idea of relationships. I think that might have been Lori. I think I saw that. Very dear relationships, of course, the mother's love for her child, right? The idea of survival, the whole idea of immigration. Let's talk a little bit about style. What did you think of the author's style of writing?
Lynda, you still had, Mindy had her hand up as well.
Okay.
And there's a number of comments. So before we go on to that. So
Sure.
Mickey, do you want to unmute?
Okay. Yeah, I think people doing policy should read something like this. I don't think people realize the desperation and the types of people that are usually migrants and what's going on. And I was also very taken with, I think the boy said about there are good people and there are evil people. And it's almost equal, which is, it shows it's horrific people all along, and also the kindness and concern that how people bonded together and helped each other. So we need to remember both of that.
Right. Mindy, I want to remember, all of us should remember the reactions, and especially when Mindy was talking about just now, because if you remember these when we have our conversation later about the controversy. So remember how you felt about the book, and we'll talk about the controversy later. Good.
Lynda, some other comments that came in just about how they felt about the book. Stephanie said distressed. Phyllis said it was upsetting. Michelle said relieved that they made it. Diane said that she felt that every American should read it, which I think that's what Lori had also said.
Right.
Janet said that she felt sympathy for those trying to find safety. Jackie thought it was well done, but somewhat overdone in the description. And that the drama, the description was overdone by too much description. And I really liked it. And having lived in a couple of states with migrant issues, I thought it was fairly fair. Stephanie also said it was incredibly sad that people have to go through that. Roberta was asking if it was ever made into a movie, which I don't think yet, but obviously
she did sign a movie deal for it.
we can see the movie going. And Jackie said what people had to go through to get what we take for granted. Jillian commented that it was interesting to see the journey from their eyes. And we've somebody, it just says user, but it says, I think that anyone who brings attention to a plight of immigrants is doing a service. It should make no difference if they're actually immigrants themselves, as long as it raises awareness in a positive light.
Okay, so that's really some part of going towards the controversy at the end, which is wonderful.
Yes.
Good. So just moving along, I wanted to get back to, I think it was Jackie who talked about the description. Let's talk about the style. Did you like the style? There has been criticism about some of the description being a bit over the top. Anything else that you want to comment about the style? My first thought is that the opening was so horrific. It was so suspenseful that I think for most of us, you were engaged right from the beginning. She does a very good job of building suspense throughout the story. Any other thoughts on style before we move along?
Stephanie said you were drawn right in, which is exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
I thought some of the description was too much, but there was one line that kind of grabbed me, and it goes back to something that Jane said about jumping on the train, because I want you to picture this one scene. She's describing the first time that she teaches Luca. They watch these other people jumping onto the train, and she tells Luca how to do it. He's going to do it. And she watches her son jump from the overpass onto the train. So listen to this description. She sees him, the tight tuck of him, how small he is, how absurdly brave he is, his muscles and bones, his skin and hair, his thoughts and words and ideas, the very bigness of his soul. She sees all of him in that moment, his thoughts, his words. She sees all of it when his body leaves the safety of the overpass and flies just momentarily upward because of the effort of his exertion, until gravity catches him and he descends toward the tops of La Bestia. I thought that was pretty powerful, because you could just picture how she saw his entire life, his entire being as he flew towards that train. What did you think about her insertion of Spanish words, by the way? I will share with you that a lot of the Latin authors really did not care for that part. They thought that the words that she chose to utilize or to translate were sort of not meaningful and didn't necessarily add to the story. Talking about the characters, okay, I want to talk about Lydia. So how would you describe her? Is she relatable? What characteristics would you describe her as having?
Tenacity.
Tenacity for sure. Oh my, yes. So perseverant. while I'm waiting for you to come up with things, I'll say one thing, and that was the fact that she was a middle-class woman. You know, one of the questions that is asked on a lot of these sites is, would the reader, the American reader, would we have responded as strongly as we did to her if she had been poor? The fact that she was middle class, did we relate to her a little bit better? And there was one scene in particular that was interesting where she remembers watching on television the caravans of migrants that were coming from Honduras and Guatemala. Do you remember this scene? And she's making a salad during dinner. And she's thinking, oh my, how horrible, how dreadful, how sad. And then she realizes as she's making her salad that she's out of garlic. And her attention shifts from the migrant situation to the fact that she doesn't have garlic and dinner is going to be really bland. I thought that was interesting, you know, the idea that you're watching it on TV and how do you relate to it in a different way, as she is soon going to find out. Anything else you want to talk about, Lydia?
Lynda, Monica wrote that we related to her because she loved to read.
That's for sure.
True.
She owned a bookstore. What could be better? Right.
She was also called some of the other characterizations people have written in as Mama Bear, Survivor on Heightened Alert, and she was forced to rise to the challenges everyone would.
Absolutely. What about the feelings that she had after the killing, after the massacre of her family?
Jane has her hand up. Jane, do you want to go ahead and say something?
Unmute.
I think she went, first it was horror, and then she realized her survival need kicked in. The fact that, oh my God, I have to save my son. And it kicked in so strong that she almost tried to willfully block out the horror of what had happened so she could function, because she had to keep them alive.
And even the point of when she's looking at their bodies and she says, oh my God, what kind of a woman would leave her family unburied? But she's able to put that aside and move forward because she knows she has to get out of there with Luca.
Leslie,
And not everybody could. Not everyone could. She was very strong.
Right. Leslie, did you have something?
Yes. First of all, I was going to say, I think she was one of the most motherly persons or characters that I've ever seen in a book. The way that she just loved her son so much, and there was so much physical affection with him, how they cuddled and how she wrapped her body around him, which, you know, was a beautiful scene, beautiful and horrible.
Right.
And also the way that she got through it, and I've related to it so much, was that she would say, don't think. She just had to move on with whatever she was doing and not think, because thinking just tore her apart.
And when getting to your point about the way she describes the relationship with Luca, the author, in one of her interviews that I watched online, she talks about the fact that one of her overriding themes was parental love. Yeah, exactly. I was very taken with, I was just going to say that I was very taken with her guilt. She realized that no one in her family had chosen to marry Sebastian, the journalist. She had done that, and her family had paid for her choice. And then her guilt, how could she have gotten it so wrong about Javier, right? She knew this man, and yet she failed to appreciate the danger he presented. She failed to protect her family. Any other thoughts, guys, about Lydia? Well, of course, we know how strong she is. I love this part where she herself comes to see that there are two Lydias. She's the sensible bookstore owner, the devoted mother and wife. That's one Lydia. And then there's this other Lydia who thinks that dragging her 8-year-old son onto the top of a moving freight train is a good idea. So she has to become almost two people in one. What about her marriage with Sebastian, by the way? Do you think they had a good marriage? Yeah, you're nodding yes. Am I reading you guys right? Yes. I thought it was an interesting thing because she does develop this very strong relationship with Javier, which I want to talk about next. But I think what's interesting is she had a strong marriage, I thought, with Sebastian. See if you agree with me. Because she writes, she and Sebastian had always agreed that married people were entitled to a degree of privacy, that they needn't tell each other everything. She says she and Sebastian were both trustworthy. They fancied themselves quite modern. They kept nothing important from each other, but she liked having a sacred cupboard within herself to which only she was allowed access. So there was nothing wrong in her failure of not telling Javier her relationship with, not telling Sebastian about her relationship with Javier, of course, until she had to at the very end, of course, when he writes the article. Any other thoughts on her relationship with her husband? Because I want to move on.
People that agreed with you that they had a good relationship. And then one person wrote in that she had guilt over not agreeing with Sebastian about going to the hotel when the article began.
Not only not agreeing, she said 100% she was sure he would be fine with it, Javier. Right. So the talk about guilt, man. Wow. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that? Because otherwise I want to talk about Javier because I thought he was a pretty fascinating guy.
Jane has her hand up. Jane, you want to unmute?
Okay, Jane.
Jane, we got to get you unmuted. There we go. Oop.
Okay. Jane, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. There you go.
She was so very responsive to and open to the chemistry she had naturally with Javier, so much so that it blinded her to even the possibility that he could be part of the cartel. In fact, the leader of the cartel. And it just shows that just because there's chemistry between two people and it seems like they're so alike and it seems like they have so much in common, they can be actually opposites.
Right. So she's struggling throughout, I think, to reconcile that idea. Once she finds out who he is, she's trying to figure out how complex this guy is, that she knows one soft side of him and there's this whole other horrific side.
Jody also has her hand up.
Okay. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but we're talking about her guilt and the fact that she did get it right about the article. He did love the article. He thought it showed him beautifully.
That's
the problem was this unanticipated consequences of that article, which blew everything up.
Jody, that brings me to such a good point. I was going to bring it up later, but remember when the article comes out, he felt betrayed by her, but because he thought maybe the poem, remember, he thought maybe she had shared the poem, which actually Marta had given to the newspaper. But it turns out, what is it that changed actually, that what the author calls a wrinkle of resentment that he had when the article showed up? What was it that changed him into a crazed murderer? What was the incident?
His daughter.
What was the incident that changed it?
His daughter's suicide.
His daughter's suicide.
Yes, of course. And his daughter's suicide. Why did that happen? Why did his daughter commit suicide?
You have people answering that in the chat where basically that he only knew one side, that daughter only knew one side of it. So that was the good side. So that was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Leslie also has her hand up, just to tell you.
Yeah. Am I unmuted now?
yeah, you're good.
Yeah. It's almost as if Marta and Lydia were in the same position. You know, they only saw the good side of Javier, and they kind of didn't, well, the daughter didn't know about it, but Lydia just didn't want to see it. He was such a charmer. I mean, he knew exactly how to get to her. In fact, I was just wondering at this moment if maybe he did a little research, you know, to find out things about her so that he could appeal to her. I don't know what that motive would be, but it seemed like it. I mean, he knew just what books to take out from her bookstore that happened to be her favorites. And he, you know, appealed to her in such a way that she just could not resist him.
Interesting way of looking at it about the research. I actually thought that it really was just this sort of chemistry between them that shockingly he was shocked that at the friendship also. In fact, at one point he says, I've never had a friend like this. Everybody that has ever said they were my friend, it's because they wanted something back from me. So this is the first time he's got that feeling. And he shares with her about Marta, and this becomes very critical later on in the story. Remember, he tells Lydia that Marta is the sky, the moon, and all the stars, that she is in fact the only good thing he's ever done in his life, and Marta is his whole world. So you see how impactful her loss was to him. That becomes very, very important. Talk a little bit about the relationship that Javier develops with Lydia. How did he feel about her? How did she feel about him? What were your thoughts about that relationship?
Lynda, Jackie wrote a comment
Yeah.
that about relationships saying we see what we want to see. And I'm not sure, Jackie, do you want to unmute? And is that about the Javier relationship with
That's
his
what
daughter?
that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Well, I think
Yeah, that's
I think
fine,
both
Stephen.
about the daughter
I always
and
have a,
Wait, we got a couple people
got it.
unmuted. Jackie,
Okay.
are you unmuted now? Go ahead.
I am unmuted. I think it had to do with the daughter and with Lydia, but honestly, I think it's most people see what they want to see. I mean, I don't necessarily think that people are hiding things. I think we want to see what, and I think that's what they did. So of course, a daughter doesn't want to look at her dad and think that he's possibly a murderer. She wants to think he's her hero. And Lydia was looking for a friend that shared something with her. So I think that's where that came from.
That's
Oh,
why I
very
wanted
good.
you to talk, because I thought that comment
Yeah,
was
very
really helpful.
interesting comment.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Jackie. Good. Great. Anything else about their relationship? I see Sandy's hand is up. I don't know if you see that, Debbie. Sandy, go.
Oh, okay, so we got to unmute Sandy. Go ahead. Hold on one
You
second.
have to unmute, Sandy.
Okay.
There you go.
They shared things that were personal as well as books. Like
Mhm.
they both had lost fathers to cancer. And she was very vulnerable at a young age when her father died, Lydia. And they developed a relationship before she knew who he was. She didn't find out till afterwards. And I thought it was interesting that Sebastian was able in some way to feel for her loss, even though he knew this man was dangerous, a murderer, which also speaks about the fact that they did have a good marriage.
Yes. I think you also hit on something else there, Sandy, which is the idea that they had this thing in common. Not only the fact that they both cherished their children so much, by the way, that of course is important towards the end of the story. But the second thing is about the father dying of cancer, the father's dying of cancer. Remember, that was such a powerful thing that happened to her in her childhood, in her young, I shouldn't say childhood, her young adult life. And the fact that he could relate to that. In fact, it was so powerful that Sebastian thinks that was really one of the reasons why they ended up getting married, because he comforted her and he was there for her at the time of her father's loss. So that was another thing that bound them together, she and Javier. And he was flirting with her, wasn't he? He was flirting with her. What else about that relationship? I thought it was interesting. I love this part. He decides, because they've shared so much and they shared about life and poetry, and he brings her the poems he wrote. He calls her the queen of his soul, as opposed to his wife, who's queen of his heart, and his mistress, who's queen of his pants. I thought that was really funny.
Jane actually had written that the motive was getting to her husband, who was a journalist writing against the cartel. But I don't know, personally, I don't know if I agree with that from the beginning when they first met, because I don't know, and I'm not sure if that's what you meant, Jane. So do you want to unmute on that?
Yeah, not from the beginning.
Right.
But I think as the relationship developed, he had to know who her husband was. And I think when he first walked in the bookstore, I don't think there was that motive. I don't think it was as intense. It became very intense. And I think he probably spent a lot of mental time figuring out how to get closer and closer to her once he realized who her husband was.
Well,
That's just conjecture.
Okay,
That's
so that's
conjecture. That's conjecture.
Right. Okay, question. Yeah, we don't know. Whether
there
it was
a couple goes right with Jane's comment, which was that Lynda said, I think it was telling that Javier thought Lydia knew who he was and accepted him anyway.
Yes.
Right.
And that was, and then somebody else, who was it, had said, oh, Jody had said that she thought that it was interesting that Lydia didn't like his poetry, even though they had a very deep relationship, that she didn't like his poetry. And Letty pointed out that even though she had a good marriage, Javier filled some void in her.
Yeah.
And she got a couple agreements on that one. So
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that was interesting.
You know
Jody,
what? She keeps talking about the fact that he was such a dear and an important friend to her. Yeah. And yeah.
And Jody pointed out too that whenever you find someone to share your favorite books with, that person can become very dear. I think we all can agree.
That's a good point. Yeah. Right. That's, yeah. I love the part where he gives her the nesting dolls. Remember that? And he gives her the nesting dolls, and he says to her that he looks at the outside dolls and he says, "This is me." And he gets to the tiny, smallest, most beautifully detailed doll in the center, tiny little thing. And he says, "And that's you." And then in Spanish, he says, it's you inside of me. So in other words, he's really, really showing this bond that the two of them have in common. So she's enjoying his flirting. This kind of course, later for him, do you think that was it a flirtation, or do you believe that he was falling in love with her? I personally thought he was really falling in love with her, which is why this makes him such a conflicted character. What did you guys think? Did you think he was actually falling in love with her?
Lynda had written, I don't think he had an ulterior motive. He didn't need one. He had power.
Right. So,
but Jackie agrees with you that you're getting a lot of agreement. People are coming in saying that they agree that he was in love.
They agree. Okay, good. Sandy, I see Sandy's hand is up. Unmute. We can't hear you, Sandy. You have to unmute.
There you
Okay. He did, I think he did fall in love with her as she did with him. And I think they were able to read each other and understand signals, because when she closed up those nesting dolls, she didn't do it quite properly. And he knew that that was not her. So he knew she was nervous about something. And that's how the fact that she knew about him came out.
Right. And I thought it was so powerful when she is trying to defend him to Sebastian, and she says to him, "But even you have said that it's not so bad. The cartels, it's really kind of improving." And I'm just getting something strange on my screen here. Okay. And her husband says, Sebastian says, "Are you kidding? He may be less violent than the others, but we are talking degrees of murder here, and he is a major narco. When you've killed that many people, killing becomes conventional. That guy would kill anyone if he thought it was the smart thing to do." And she's trying to say, but, really, maybe he doesn't mean it. She's trying to bring out this softer side to her husband, and he's just not understanding. He wants her to remember that he might be a friend to her, but he's a really bad guy. Any other thoughts that you want to bring out about that relationship? Okay, so moving on. She's experienced this horrific killing of the family. She takes Luca and she hides with him. And I remember how she has to do it. She has to just from her mother's home, she takes money from under the mattress, and they go to the hotel. And they go to the hotel, and she thinks she's scared to death with Luca. They're in the room, and all of a sudden the bellboy comes up and he's got a gift. Do you remember the gift? It was the book, right? And the book Love in the Time of Cholera, which, by the way, was a fabulous book for those that haven't read it. But what's the significance of him sending that book to her in the hotel room? How'd you take that? Sandy's hand is up. I think I can sort of see my screen here. Sandy?
To sort of let her know that he knows where she is.
Yeah, for sure. It's a threat. It's a threat. What else?
You got a comment, unrequited love.
Okay, exactly. Because, good point, he highlights a passage in there from the book. Oh, by the way, did you realize the name that she signed in as? Fermina Diaz, which was, of course, one of the characters in Love in the Time of Cholera. And the highlighted section that he had done was, I have waited for this opportunity for more than half a century to repeat to you once again my vow of eternal fidelity and everlasting love. And then he sends her a handwritten note on top of that, which says, there is blood on your hands as well. I'm sorry for your pain and mine. Now we are bound forever in this grief. I never imagined this chapter for us, but do not worry, Queen of my soul, your suffering will be brief. So what's he getting to here? Any thoughts on that?
Looks like Nicole has her hand up.
Can you hear
Anybody
me?
else? No, Nicole, go ahead.
I forgot the question now.
About what the handwritten note that he writes to her. He says, now we are bound forever in this grief. So what I took from this, Sandy, did you have something else you wanted to add? Go ahead.
Well, I think what I saw as the simple explanation was that her life was going to be brief.
Right.
Because she was going to be found and killed.
So this was a terrific threat. And I think it was very powerful that he sent it in this book that they had loved and discussed. And it's a reminder of their friendship, which even made it scarier. But I think also he is assuming at this point that she knows about Marta. Remember that she did not know. So he's saying there's blood on both our hands. And she's assuming it's because, you know, they had this friendship, whatever, and that Sebastian had written the article. She doesn't know at that point about Marta. What was very powerful was talking about their relationship. At the end of the novel, if you remember, I'm going to set the scene for you. Soledad, okay, so Rebecca, we're going to talk later about the two sisters, but yet the one sister goes out at night, and Lorenzo, remember, he's one of these, he was trying to escape the cartel, and Lorenzo comes out and he's trying to rape her. The coyote, right? The coyote comes with a gun and he stops the rape, and Soledad, the sister, comes out, grabs the gun, shoots Lorenzo dead. So that's the scene. And Lydia goes back to Lorenzo's body and she finds his cell phone, and she picks up the cell phone and she calls Javier, right? And she says to Javier, what? This has to end. And what does he say? This can never be over. We have both lost everything. And he says, you know, I never wished for your death. Surely, you know, if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. He says, I could never harm you. I never meant to. At that point, she cuts him off. She doesn't want to hear his explanations. So my question to you is, what do you think he meant to do to her? When he says, go ahead.
Stephanie wanted to make a comment.
Hi. So the thing that bothers me about this whole thing is that we're talking about a person I thought that was intensely evil. I mean, this is not somebody who, yes, he charmed her and he was charming. I think we all know people who are sociopaths who are charming and can engage people and somehow are able to find the piece of them that they need to tap into something. So I think to even talk about a relationship with her, yes, he obviously managed to pull her in, but that's what the power of his personality did. And I think that he would have killed her in a heartbeat. I think he would have killed Luca, just as he killed every member of the family. And if they hadn't been in the shower that day, they would have been dead. That was his vendetta. And his whole feeling that somehow he had lost Marta, who was precious to him, was that he had to pay her back. Doesn't matter how he felt about her.
Interesting. Any other thoughts on that? Any other thoughts? Okay, so what I thought, and I took of it is a lot of what you said, Stephanie, but I thought of even one other thing. I thought when he said, I never intended to kill you, I think that was sort of, might have been true, even though he probably would have killed her. I think what he wanted to do more than killing her was, I think he wanted her to suffer the loss of Luca the way he suffered. Because really, what would have hurt her more than death? The loss of Luca. And I think he wanted to pay her back for that. Just what Stephanie is saying, the idea of the payback, I think is nothing could hurt her as much as the loss of Luca. And what made me think of that was in the very beginning, when she overhears in the shower stall, the bad guy, the killer, says, and what about the kid? So I kind of flip back at the end of the book, by the way, to reread that section. And so you see that they really were looking for the kid. And it turns out that the answer was, if you recall, Lydia's nephew was among the 16 slaughtered. And so the answer from the other killer is, oh yeah, well, there's a kid outside. And they think, okay, well, then that's the kid. So then they're done. They don't know that Luca has actually survived with Lydia. So I think he actually wanted to even hurt her more by taking Luca's life.
Lynda, you have a number of people that agreed with exactly what you just said, because Letty said, she kind of summed it up for everyone, keeping her alive after he killed everyone, including Luca, would be the best vengeance.
Yeah.
But that he did want to do that. And as well, Ellen has her hand up. So Ellen, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And did you have a comment to make?
Well, that I had written that actually down, and because that would even the scale. Killing her wouldn't matter; she would have been dead. But to know the same pain, that it wouldn't be sympathy but empathy, is just very, very important. I was thinking from the very beginning, though, that had the article not appeared, that maybe she would have become also that she would have become his lover, displacing the other lover. That they seem to have been a bond there that went beyond the books. And I thought that was an interesting sort of thing, that she had that drive. You asked about marriage initially, and she had a good marriage with Sebastian, but somehow or other, she didn't have that intellectual bond with Sebastian that she had with Javier. And there she had, and you could almost feel the sexual tension between them when he would buy her a present or something. It was just, I don't know, I felt had the article not appeared, it would have been different.
Oh, that's interesting. Where it might have gone had that not happened. At one point in the book, I actually wrote a couple of notes on the idea that she really enjoyed his flirtation, and he relished the idea that she kind of was rejecting him. They really had this kind of thing going on, this flirtation. But there's one point where the author says, or where she says, she's rolling her eyes when he does proclamations of love to her, because she feels that in the weather of their flirtation, it was but a passing cloud. So she doesn't realize at that point what the depth is. And then finally he says to her, you don't understand. I don't just love you. I am in love with you. So he takes it to a whole other level. I'm not sure where, as you point out, Ellen, it's hard to project where that might have gone. Interesting. Was there anything else he was going to say to her in the way of explanation at the end when she cuts him off? Was there anything else? There's one other line that I saw. I'm wondering if anyone else picked this up. She knows he wants to plead guilty by way of grief. She knows grief is a kind of insanity. She knows that only too well. So she thinks he's going to really try to plead insanity or something from that. How does she feel when she's talking to him, by the way? So there's all these conflicted feelings that he supposedly has. What about her when she's having this conversation? Do you remember that? So he says her name at the end, in the beginning. She hears him say Lydia, and it's confusing to her because she remembers how he used to say the name in a very sweet and lovely, loving way. But now, quote, her hatred of him is so enormous, it's the biggest feeling she has ever felt. Stronger than the love she ever had for Sebastian, stronger than the feeling she had when she gave birth, stronger than the hole her father left when he died without saying goodbye. But when she hears him sigh, a familiar mannerism, it was a once beloved sigh. And she thinks about that. And all of a sudden, this is the line in there. It says, it tilts her psyche like a fun house. So she also it's hard to reconcile everything that has happened in her mind. And she finally says to him, I am stronger than you, she says. And why is she stronger? Why did she tell him she's stronger? She sort of is saying, I've won. This is over. I won. Why? How did she win? How did she win?
By survival.
By survival, 100%.
There's, and she has her child with her.
Exactly, because it's powerful. At the end, exactly right. She says, I will survive because I still have Luca. So she has managed to pull that off.
Yeah. You have a number of people that agreed with that, with survival, and Leslie has her hand up. So Leslie, do you want to unmute?
Leslie?
You're good.
Yeah, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, I was going to say that she won over him because she just wanted to survive and she was doing everything, you know, what the whole trip where he just, I think after his daughter died, he felt that it was over. You know, I just got that feeling about him where she still wants to go on with her son.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So any other comments you guys want to make about their relationship, anything with them? Because I wanted to move on and talk a little bit about some of the other characters and the other subplots in the story. Anything else we haven't touched on?
One other comment that came in or about why she was strong was because she could protect Luca, but Javier couldn't protect Marta.
Oh my. That's, yeah. And she made the assumption all along, I think it was the one thing she didn't consider. How could Marta have not known who he really was? Which is ironic because she did not know who he really was, what he was capable of. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, moving on. So the author goes ahead and tells us now about all of these people that they meet. And I thought it was powerful when the priest, they're on their way and they go to the Casa Migrante. They're at a church that's helping them along the way. And the priest warns everybody there to turn back. He says, if it's only a better life you're seeking, seek it elsewhere. This path is only for people who have no choice, no other option, only violence and misery behind you. And your journey will grow even more treacherous from here. Only 1 out of 3 of you is going to make it to the destination alive. So then we meet these characters. I'm going to ask you which stories were the most poignant for you? What moved you the most? And what do you think it added to this story? I'll start you off by just suggesting to you the characters I'm talking about, Rebecca and Soledad, the 2 sisters. There was the little guy traveling on his own, Beto, right? We had the 2 brothers. We had Marisol, who was, remember her? She lived in California, had a nice life. She was a dialysis technician, reports for her check-in, and guess what? She's deported. So which of these stories sort of resonated the most with you, moved you the most?
Diane said Soledad and Rebecca. That was
Yeah.
the first one we've gotten in so far. I'm sure
So
of the sisters, we just got another sisters.
good. Sisters, for sure.
Another
Okay.
one for sisters. Sisters.
So what is it that was so, how were they portrayed? What does the author want us to see about them? How are they portrayed? And I'll start us off. Well, we see this amazing bond between them, right? To the point that we know that the reason they're traveling is because Soledad, the older sister, is protecting her sister Rebecca. And both of them are fleeing because we find out what had happened in their town. What drove them out is the fact that these cartel guys came in and were just taking girls randomly and kidnapping them. Rape was so prevalent. What else do we see about these sisters and their story?
Diane commented that they cared so much for each other and they felt terrible about their father.
Yeah. You see the pain and you see the payback that goes on from the cartels, right? The father, they paid the father back.
Yeah. Jackie commented that she'd like to say that she thought the girls looking over the fence at the flag was the most powerful moment. It actually represents the entire book, something each wants or needs and either can never attain it or won't, or the work to get to it is almost beyond reach. It's the escape and how we all attain it.
Yeah. So that's interesting because really what I was going to bring up at the end was the significance of the title. And you're right, Soledad is the one that brings it really to the fore. Because if you remember, she comes out at night, she's looking at the border, she's at the fence. And what does she do? You remember what she does? She spits through the fence, right? And why does she do that? It's the only time, the only time that the title is mentioned. Why does she do it?
She can be on American dirt.
That's the one thing, she can leave a piece of herself. No matter what happens, she's left to. And you know what I thought of the title? Well, what else do you want to say? I'm going to come back to talking about the other people, but let's get back to the American Dirt. Talk about the title to you, American Dirt. What did it mean?
Leslie has her hand up. Leslie, do you want to unmute?
Well, it also, to me, it could have been called Up North, to the north, because every time they were talking about where they're going up north.
El Norte, right. That's
yes.
it.
Kind of like the slaves, when they were fleeing on the Underground Railroad, they were going up north. Yeah.
It was the dream destination. Right.
Right. I also wanted to say that the girls were pictured as so beautiful that it seemed like the men just couldn't resist them. I'm not making an excuse for them, but it was just so amazing how beautiful, especially Soledad, was supposed to be.
Right.
And the rape scenes were horrific. They really bothered me.
I think one of the things that the author wants us to know is that story of, remember that she says, at one point somebody says that the body, that the people are, the word was cuerpo mático. And what did that mean? That they were human ATM machines, that the way people could pay off their debts was by selling their bodies. So not only the girls, obviously a lot of people. And there was conversation in these migrant camps. Have you paid? Yes, I had to pay twice. So, it's painful. And that was something that I think was put in there with purpose.
Lynda, there's a comment from Judith that she said American dirt refers to the soil, but also how the immigrants are looked down upon like dirt.
Ah, that's interesting.
I thought so too. And Jody and Stephanie have their hand up. So Jody, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, so dirt is when somebody, the first time I heard it, I thought it was actually about the press digging up dirt. But like our dirt is, we are in some way responsible for the cartels because we provide the guns to them. So so that it is our dirt that we are we're just pretending that it's a Mexican problem or a South American problem, but it's really us causing the problem.
Jody, interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's interesting. Yeah.
And Stephanie had her hand up.
I think that I saw it almost like the stain on our country. American dirt. I think like Jody, it's not just that we provide the guns, but we also provide the need. They have to feed the drug addiction in very often in America. And I think that the immigration policy is also a stain on our country and how we have dealt with immigrants. That's what I saw American Dirt.
So that's what I love about a book club. Look at all these different ideas that we all have about the title. Any other thoughts? And then I want to share what I was thinking. Anybody else have anything?
There was one more from Monica where she said the title has a dual meaning, portrays the sad and dirty part of the immigrant experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I thought about was how when Luca is looking out while they're traveling, he's very disappointed. He says the road below he's looking, it looks nothing. It looks like all the roads. It doesn't look anything like what he'd imagined he'd encounter in the USA. He thought every road would be broad as a boulevard, paved to perfection and lined with fluorescent shop fronts. But this road, he says, looks like the crappiest Mexican road he's ever seen. Dirt, dirt, and more dirt. So physically, it's only dirt. Even to Lydia, it's interesting that when she has the moment of crossing, she thought it was going to be a celebratory moment in her mind, but she doesn't even realize when it happened. She's never looked back. So what I thought about with that was that for the migrants, reaching the way Soledad was looking at dirt, for them, it's like the end of the rainbow. To them, it's summed up when Beto says, remember, they're there, and he says, this is the whole problem. Look at that American flag over there. They're at the border. Look at the American flag over there. You see, all bright and shiny. It looks brand new. And then look at ours. It's all busted up and raggedy. So to me, what it sounded like was, to them, American dirt is what the past generation of immigrants, the way they pictured our American streets paved in gold. You know, they all remember there was a Yiddish expression, I remember, golden Medina. You know, the golden land. Everybody thought that the streets were paved in gold because that was the end of the rainbow. That was, you know, that's how I took it. But when, you know, so it's, again, as Monica says, it's sort of this, you know, more than dual, more than a duality. There's many ways of looking at it. I'm being mindful of the timing, and I do want to just ask you, any other thoughts on any of the other characters, anything that you found very moving? The sisters certainly, I think, were so poignant. To me, the whole reason that the author put all of these stories in is obviously they're all portraying reasons, horrible, devastating reasons why people are migrating. And as the priest says, the only people that are migrating for the most part are the people that are so desperate to get out. I want to also now ask, okay, so nobody had any comments about any of the other characters?
The only other one that we got was about the mom. Hold on, let me go back. And it was basically, hold on, let me find it. We did get one more that was most unrealistic. And then we had one about the mother that we could relate to her living here and then suddenly having her life destroyed.
Marisol, yeah, that was very, very painful. The idea that she has daughters here in the US that are citizens, she's living a very productive life. Yeah, right.
Oh, and there was one about the coyote being really a kind person, even though he portrayed himself as a strict person.
Exactly. So in a way, again, you see these complicated people where you think in the beginning that he's hard-hearted and everything else, and then you find out how he became a coyote. And of course, you see how tender he was at the end. He's going to come back and bury Beto. Yeah.
We also have two hands up. We have Stephanie and Jody have their hands up. So Stephanie, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I wondered how everybody felt about Beto, because that should have been one of the most sympathetic characters, this child, really, that is going through. And not only that, he has the asthma and he has no medication. I identify that because I have asthma. So the whole time he was breathing, I was breathing with him.
Yes.
But I found that the hardest for me to actually relate to in terms of sympathizing with him. And I'm not sure, because it should have been the one that one naturally is drawn to. I don't know if it just felt the most unrealistic to me.
Beto.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because also what I wondered about with that one was he did have money, if you remember, right? He did have money, and yet why did nobody say at any point, let's go ahead and get him some medication? So I found that a little bit unrealistic. There are a few things in here that you'll see when we talk about the controversy I want to get to at the end that people did question. A couple last comments, and then I want to, yeah, go on. Go ahead.
Jody had her hand up, so if she wants to unmute.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the guy who was escaping the gang.
Lorenzo, yes, Lorenzo.
So Lorenzo was an interesting character because
He was.
Here he is trying to do the right thing and the good thing as far as he's concerned, but he can't keep himself from raping women.
Right.
So I think that's I have to say I was really happy that he got shot at the end.
Exactly right. Exactly.
I felt justice was served.
Yeah. But it was interesting because in a way he was sympathetic because he was trying to leave the cartel. He had gotten, recruited when he was so young. So that was a shame. Sorry about that. Let me just. Okay. He'd gotten recruited. So, and he redeems himself a bit at the end. Do you remember why? At the end? Here he's tracking them and he's going to turn over Lydia and Luca as a parting gift to the cartel, to Javier, so that Javier will leave him alone in the future and let him escape. And in fact, what happens at the end when she picks up his phone, Lydia? What does she see?
She saw that he didn't reveal where they were.
Yeah.
That was a good thing. It wasn't good enough, but it was a good thing. Yeah. In terms of another character also though, the guy with the machete who led them from one place to another.
The coyote, yeah.
I loved that character.
Yes,
he didn't have much to say. He just said, I'm just doing the right thing. I don't need your thanks. I don't need anything from you. I'm doing my job. I thought that was great.
I agree with you. Yeah, I think so too.
Leslie also has her hand up.
I was just going to talk about Lorenzo also, but I didn't really feel that he had such a good side. I mean, I thought he was just like putting one over on Lydia, and the girls. I didn't think he was really trying to be good. I think he was bad all the way through. I don't know. I didn't see that good side in him.
The only suggestion of that is at the very end, and you're right. He did seem that he was bad through and through, but at the very end, it's a little surprising. And even Lydia sees that when he didn't answer those texts from Javier, where he could have actually said, where she was or whatever, and he didn't. He didn't respond. Okay. So she says herself, there was a little possibility for redemption, but certainly nobody cared that he was dead. That was for sure. Right. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the ending of the book. Did you like the ending? But I do want to move on to the controversy. So Debbie, how are we with time here?
You're good. You can go for it.
What did you think about the ending? Did you like the ending? Remember the ending? All of a sudden they're living now with, they're living in Maryland.
It was a quick wrap up. For a very long journey. It was like, oh, now we're here.
So they make it. And that was a very quick wrap up. No thoughts on that? Okay. Well, it was probably a pretty realistic ending in that she becomes a housekeeper, whatever, right?
Stephanie does have her hand up if you want to unmute Stephanie.
Stephanie, did you have something?
No, I think I agreed with Debbie. I think it was too quick and felt somewhat unsatisfying.
Yeah.
That's just how I felt.
Yeah, I kind of did too. Like I thought they really could have left it with them making it to America.
Editing choice that I'm not sure about. That was it was almost like we've given you enough space and now.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the criticism and the controversy that has come. And I want to give you a little background. You should know that the main criticism stems from the fact that Janine Cummins is a woman who has until recently identified as white. When there was a lot of brouhaha that followed, like what was a white woman doing talking about this Mexican story, she then said that she also had she was part Puerto Rican, that she had a grandmother that I shared who was Puerto Rican. And so one of the criticisms is that all of a sudden she became Puerto Rican by convenience. So that was one issue. Secondly, she said that her husband was an undocumented immigrant, which kind of led everybody to believe that she understood the experiences of the Central Americans, what they feel. And in fact, it comes out later that he's an Irish immigrant, which means that, of course, he did not have the same experience as the migrants that she's describing in her story. So there were just a couple misfires with that. So this criticism really stems from the fact that this was not supposedly her story to tell. And there was a large group of Latino writers who came forth and they wrote negative reviews about the book. They couldn't understand why a white woman would write this story from a migrant's perspective when her connection to them was through a few visits and research rather than life experience. And they say, in many ways, she got it wrong. She didn't truly understand the culture she was writing about. For starters, they say a Mexican woman would never be as shocked as she was at a lot of the things that Lydia experienced and what she saw. They believe her characters are stereotypes, that they continue the negative impressions that many Americans have towards Mexico and its immigrants. To the Latino writers, in no way should this book be hailed as the grapes of wrath of our times, because a lot of people have described it as that. And so what's painful mostly, what I got out of this, what's most painful for the Latino writers is that before Cummins had written this book, many, many Latino writers had written wonderful, powerful stories about migrants fleeing their country in order to make it into the United States, and they could not get published. They had the personal experience, which Cummins did not. Moreover, not only did she manage to get published, but she ended up with a bidding war between 9 publishing companies, and in the end, she received a 7-figure book deal and a movie deal as well. Another misfire, by the way, is that her marketing campaign was a multi-tiered one. And the night before the launch of her book, they made a very beautiful dinner party, and they had flowers as centerpieces on the table. And around the flowers, they had barbed wire. And the author, looking back, realizes that was in really bad taste, as was her retweeting of a photo of someone with a manicure that sported barbed wire on all 10 fingers. And of course, according to these Latinx writers, Mexico and the Mexicans trying to immigrate are so much more than the story of barbed wire at the border. You should know that one of the outcomes of this controversy is that the publishing companies are now forced to notice them. What has come out is that the publishing industry is about 79 to 80% white, mostly rather affluent. Only 3% of the publishing people involved in publishing are Latino. And so the belief is that the publishers have not wanted to publish any books by authors who have Spanish names. And the reason this book was promoted, sorry. Okay, I actually have it turned off, but it still is ringing, okay. The reason why it's promoted is because it was written by a white woman. And so there's now a new movement that has been formed of Latin American writers known as Dignidad Literaria. And these authors are now engaged in talks with publishers about how to introduce more Latino writers to the American community. So that's really the good news. Now you should know that when these negative reviews came out, some authors, Latino authors, who had originally praised the book, rescinded their remarks. Oprah stood by her decision to back the book in spite of the criticism that she received, but she did organize a meeting between the author and 3 of the Latinx authors to address the controversial issue. So what I want to tell you is that is on YouTube. If you look up the author's name, Janine Cummins, along with Oprah, you will see this on YouTube. There's also some other powerful things on YouTube about this controversy if you want more information. So Janine Cummins understands that communities of color are frustrated with the white affluent publishing industry, and other writers have been writing about this subject for 30 years. She knows that, but she says she wanted to be a bridge, that she did all kinds of research. She read everything she could, and she resisted writing from the migrant voice herself in the beginning, but she realized that was the best way to tell the story. She wants us to know that Lydia and Luca are people that she feels she knows because, as I told you in the beginning, she had experienced grief and trauma in her life as well. Certainly not the same as described in the book, but she wants us to know that's where she's coming from. The Latino author, Sandra Cisneros, was one who offered positive reviews and drew criticism for it. She has been called by other Latino authors a sellout. She maintains that this is a novel. It is different from a memoir. She says the author has transformed these stories into something readable by people who might never have read a book by a Latin author. She says this is an engaging story for readers who want to be entertained, and it may change their minds about a very important subject. So, I ask you now, where do you stand on this? Do you think that the Latino writers have a point, that this was not her story to tell? It should have been written by a Latino person. By the way, the word they're using now is Latinx, which is gender neutral instead of Latino. Or do you think that a writer should be free to write whatever they want as long as they call it fiction, and that this author accomplished something very positive in the writing of this book? So where do you stand on it?
While we're waiting for that, I just want to point out that Stephanie had a link there was an actual NPR interview with some Latin authors about the issue. So I'm putting the link in the chat. I'm going to put it in there right now. And if you are interested in listening to that, if you take your cursor and you highlight it and hit right click, you could copy it and put it into your browser, and you could take a look and listen to that at another time. But I'm going to.
And I encourage you, Stephanie, thank you, because Stephanie did send that to me, and it's very good information about this controversy. Yeah, where do you guys stand on the issue? Any thoughts?
There are some coming in. Hold on just a minute.
I see Dora has her hand up, right? You have to
Okay.
unmute.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. Okay, that's me, if I can talk. Okay, I am a Latino and I did like the book, but I see the point of the Latinos, which is they are not treated the same way than the Americans. The editors, the ones that publish, the publishers, they all they're thinking is making money, of course, and selling the books. So if they have an American, then I mean the United States has 300 million people, and they're thinking of how many books can we sell with this, But I thought that she was very good at describing the characters, and I was wondering how much she went into looking for characters and interviewing people for her book.
Right. So Dora, what's very good is she answers in a lot of the online interviews. She talks about how she did research, but what's interesting is some of the research that she did was older. So for example, when she gives the example of Beto, who grew up in El Dompe, in the dump, that was taken from old research, and I guess the dump does not exist anymore. So that was one of the things that they're saying, she really didn't get it right 100% of the time.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you, Dora, for your perspective. That really adds a lot. Anybody else?
There's a number of really good comments in the chat. Toby said that authors have never been limited to writing only about what they know personally, and the positive impact she had on the American psyche is justification enough. Jackie wrote, if we only had books, including The Grapes of Wrath, written by those who have lived a story, we'd have so many fewer books. Hoffman said, I think each author has a right to tell the stories they want to tell. Marlene said, there's one up here. Linda P said, I read the contested books and I feel they're similar, but not the same emphasis. The others talking about the Blu-rays, not as much the book women. And Marlene wrote, under those guidelines, only Jews could write about the Holocaust, only Blacks about slavery, et cetera, et cetera. So I think everybody is on a similar page on that one. You have a number of hands up. I'm just not sure we have enough time because it is 2:51 and we have to start wrapping up. So I'm not sure we can get all those comments in.
Okay. Do we have time for one more comment or two more, or do you want to wrap now?
Why don't we pick one? We have, I'm just gonna pick off the top here is Ellen's hand. That was the first one. Go ahead, Ellen.
I was just thinking that one of the best books I ever read was Memoirs of a Geisha, which was written by a man.
Me too.
And it's this whole cancel culture is just so disgusting that I can't even go into it. It's nauseating. And that's
That, but I think a lot of us thought about that book too, Ellen. That's interesting, right?
And Harriet Beecher Stowe and John Steinbeck was not one of the people in Grapes of Wrath. I mean, you know,
Right.
so it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. They want to make something where it doesn't exist.
Well, I do think one of the positive things, as we said, that came out of this is I think we will be seeing more and more books written by Latin authors and by other minority authors as well. I want to just wrap up now with something that I think the author's takeaway message would be. She wants to remind us that each of the migrants that is coming here is carrying some story of suffering on top of that train into El Norte. And we are left with the sad fact that people who would leave their homes, their cultures, their families, their languages, and venture into tremendous peril, risking their very lives, all for the chance to get the dream of some faraway country that doesn't even want them. So the author has suggested, and I saw this online and read it also, what's her takeaway message? What does she want to leave us with? And that is that we have to look at migrants as human beings, each of them with their individual stories, and that we all need to meet this humanitarian crisis with compassion. And I think looking at that way, and that's why I asked you in the very beginning to remember back about the way you felt when you first finished the book. I think for one of the criticisms is that it was written with an American gaze, but I think considering the fact that so many of the readers were American readers, I think the author made a very, very important statement for all of us. So I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you for your participation. You are an amazing group, and I hope you're looking forward to next month as much as I am.
Thank you, Lynda.
Sign up
You're
now.
an amazing presenter.
dpjcc.org. Go ahead and sign in for
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, guys. Thank
And
you.
Thank you.
Great to see you all. Great to see you all.
Great to see you
Thank
too.
you. I like the
Thank you.
author. Yeah,
Thank
I like the
you.
author commentary. Yes, I agree with her.
Right?
Yes.
Very good.
Enjoyed all your comments. Thank you so much for your participation. It makes our group so strong. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you, Debbie.
Thank you for being here. We look forward to next month. Enjoy
Okay.
reading Frederick Bachman's Anxious People.
Yeah.